Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, M23 militias advanced on a new front in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, seizing 2 districts in South Kivu province. The Rwandan-backed rebels reportedly face little resistance as they push on from their earlier wins in the strategic city of Goma. Meanwhile, East African leaders call for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in eastern Congo. Regional concern about the political and security ramifications of the Congolese crisis are at the heart of a crisis meeting called by the EAC bloc. The DRC's president declines to attend. And Tunisian sports fans accuse authorities of co-opting the sector to further limit personal and political freedoms. Many fear that the spirit of progress that fueled the 2011 revolution is being stifled under the current administration. But first, M23 rebels captured more towns in eastern Congo on Wednesday as they pushed into South Kivu, seizing the districts of Kiniezire and Mukwija. This follows huge and destabilizing earlier gains in Goma this week. It's the provincial capital of North Kivu, and the Rwandan-backed militia's advance has left dozens dead, wounded hundreds, and ramped up an already dire humanitarian crisis. Congolese soldiers and peacekeepers were overwhelmed by the offensive, and thousands of civilians have fled over the border into Rwanda, whose soldiers, the UN says, joined forces with the M23 in its incursion into Goma. The city was calmer earlier on Wednesday, but undercurrents remain turbulent.
On Tuesday, relative calm allowed residents to leave their homes in Goma amid a dip in the intensity of fighting. Life goes on, but differently from before.
We could hear gunshots. It was threatening. They've cut off our internet, so we're cut off from the world. That's what we want most, our internet and electricity back. But otherwise, we're managing.
There were still sounds of gunfire and explosions in the North Kivu capital, but fewer than before. Lifeless bodies could be seen in the streets, especially in the west of the city, while the United Nations say M23 rebels fighting alongside Rwandan soldiers have taken control of its international airport, along with several other districts. Elsewhere in the city, exchanges of fire continued with the Congolese army and its allies, vying to retain control of the city. On Tuesday, a UN peacekeeper sounded the alarm about a deteriorating humanitarian situation at an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council.
The degree of suffering that the population in Goma and its environments is enduring is truly unimaginable. Let us please draw on our humanity and do our utmost to bring an immediate end to such levels of violence and suffering.
The UN Humanitarian Affairs spokesperson has also pointed to reports of rape, gender-based violence and looting by fighters. Hundreds of thousands in Goma live in temporary camps around the city. Deprived of water and electricity in recent days, their suffering has intensified. Meanwhile, hospitals struggle to cope with a growing number of casualties.
Well, East African leaders have called for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. The EAC bloc tried to bring the Congolese and Rwandan leaders together for a virtual emergency summit on the crisis. The Congolese president has declined to attend. The EAC is chaired by Kenya's President William Ruto. Our Olivia Bizo is in Nairobi, and she tells us more about the conflict's regional impact.
The big promises began on Sunday. That's when Kenyan President William Ruto announced that the East African Community, which he is a chair of, would be holding an emergency meeting in order to address the escalating conflict in eastern DRC. At the time, he said that that meeting would be taking place in the next 48 hours. And then on Monday, Ruto held a press conference in which he confidently announced that both Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi and Rwandan President Paul Kagame would be attending that meeting, which he promised would be taking place this Wednesday. Now, at the time, that was huge news. But we later found out that both leaders would actually not be attending. And then on Wednesday morning, we discovered that William Ruto was actually in Egypt for a presidential visit. And so this EAC meeting would actually be taking place virtually with a guest list that was looking a little empty. Now, the DRC joined this East African community in 2022. The bloc aims to create economic ties and strengthen diplomatic relations between these 7 East African countries. But tensions between the DRC and Rwanda over the rebel group, the M23, which is backed by Rwanda, has really complicated this objective of creating stability and unity in the region.
Olivia Bizo there for us in Nairobi. Meanwhile, West African regional bloc, ECOWAS, has pledged to keep the door open after 3 of its members formally withdrew on Wednesday. A year ago, Burkina Faso, Niger and Mali announced their plans to part ways with the previously 15-nation union. All 3 of the departing countries are junta-run and have created their own security alliance. Their exit is a blow to ECOWAS's clout in the region. Our West African correspondent, Justice Baidu, talks us through.
The Economic Community of West African States said in a statement today that it had taken them a year to negotiate this withdrawal. The bloc had been threatening sanctions since July of 2023, when the last coup happened in Niger. The 3 countries have gone ahead to form their own federation known as the Alliance of Sahelian States. The alliance has already started poaching neighboring countries in order to be able to work with them, with countries like Ghana's new government now nominating a security advisor specifically to deal with the alliance. The ECOWAS statement says that this new arrangement would not affect the movement of people and goods across borders. It has asked member countries to recognize persons that are moving from these countries that are bearing ECOWAS passports. They say that this arrangement would remain in place until further notice. The West African sub-region since 2020 has seen more than 6 coup d'etats and coup attempts. This has raised concerns about the region's fragility and exposure to the terror threat.
Justice there for us in Accra. And staying with the story, in Niger at least, the decision to strike out on its own appears popular with at least the several thousand people who gathered in the capital on Wednesday to celebrate the divorce from ECOWAS. The rupture was actually first sparked by Niger's mid-2023 coup, as mentioned earlier by Justice, following a report by Clarice Fortuné.
A solemn as well as festive day in Niamey. Several thousand people turned out to celebrate Niger's exit from ECOWAS. Like Mali and Burkina Faso, the country led by the military junta, showing its determination to make national sovereignty a priority.
Today, Africa in general, or the 3 peoples of the AES, have said yes to our sovereignty, our dignity, our independence in good and due form, and not the independence that was given to us on paper 60 years ago.
The 3 Sahelian countries are now united after forming their own confederation, the Alliance of Sahel States. The break with the Economic Community of West African States was finalized after the coup in Niger in 2023. The regional institution threatened to intervene militarily to reinstate deposed President Mohamed Bazoum and imposed heavy economic sanctions on Niamey, which have now been lifted. The regional bloc has nevertheless decided to remain open to dialogue.
ECOWAS member states will also continue to allow citizens of the 3 affected countries to continue to enjoy the rights of visa-free movement, residence and establishment in accordance with the ECOWAS protocols until further notice.
Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso have also decided to issue their own common passport. They will remain members of the West African Economic and Monetary Union and will continue to use the CFA franc. The next stage, in their now linked future, is the forthcoming formation of a unified army of 5,000 men.
Now, the MK party of former South African President Jacob Zuma says that his daughter will be charged for her alleged involvement in fatal riots 4 years ago. At least 300 people were killed when unrest spread through the cities of Durban and Gauteng after Zuma was jailed for contempt of court in 2021. Duduzile Zuma Sumbudla is accused of fueling that violence with her social media posts. And finally, in Tunisia, sports fans accuse authorities of co-opting the sector to further limit citizens' personal and political freedoms. They continue to raise concerns a little over 14 years since the revolution that many had hoped would usher in a new era for the country. Today, many fear that spirit of progress is being stifled under current President Kais Saied.
For many years, Tunisian authorities cited security as the reason for limiting the number of spectators at football matches. But young fans say police checks have become increasingly abusive, and some supporters even released a press statement about the accusations in December. One, from a group called the Ultras, spoke to us anonymously.
From when we enter to when we leave the stadium, the problems never stop. They ask us to take off our shoes, they interrogate us several times. We all have to go in and leave through a single door to be screened. It's not new, but we feel the control is tightening each year, and in the end, it creates more tension between us and the authorities.
Human rights groups are keeping a close eye on the pressure being put on football fans, as the country's stadiums often serve as barometers for broader social tensions.
What's worrying is that there's only a security solution applied for these young people who are very invested in the football fan groups, and many of them come from poor, marginalised neighbourhoods. It's been years and we're not changing strategy. We have to also offer them an improvement in their socio-economic conditions.
Other young demographics have also been pushing to preserve the democratic gains won during the 2011 revolution.
Here on the banner, it's written, "Injustice is the beginning of the end."
Some say that they are worried about the pace at which freedoms are being eroded.
I grew up with TV debates where there were still many opinions, debates, rappers didn't hesitate to talk politics, and now we feel that fear is back, especially among my parents' generation. They see similarities between the period they lived under the dictatorship and the current context.
Even if some protests are still allowed, police block others, especially those linked to political parties.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now, but thanks for joining us, and please do so again if you can. Till then, take care.